This is Darrick Ware, and this is the third video in a series about practice. Now, what we've talked about in the other videos is just how world-class athletes, great achievers, all are better than other people because they practice differently than others. They all approach practice very differently. Here are some books that I would encourage you to research, all talking about practice. They all understand the three components of practice, which are complexity, how complicated is the action, speed, how fast are you doing the action, and perfection, how well are you doing the action. And lowering any one of those three components is going to increase the other one or the other two. So I have two charts down here, and the chart on the left is how most people practice. They take something that's very complex and they do it full speed, but their level of perfection is very low. An example would be going into the gym. You want to improve your shot, so you just start shooting baskets, and you're missing them left and right because you're doing something that's very complex and you're doing it at a high rate of speed, but your level of perfection is very low. And when you do that, you're teaching yourself how to miss shots. You're reinforcing missing shots. So it'd be better to practice like the chart on the right. Lower the complexity, break it down into chunks, and then reduce the speed, and that will improve your level of perfection. And so here's the first component is complexity. That's all the pieces that go in. And so you'd take something that's complex, maybe shooting a basketball, throwing a football, and then you'd break it down into chunks. Take something that's complex and break it down into the simplest parts. Here's an example, throwing a football. In this video, there's me on the right, and there is the athlete is on the left, and we're teaching him how to throw a football. He's 7 years old, and throwing a football is a very complex action. And in order to teach it, especially to a younger athlete, it needs to be broken down into its smallest chunks. So the first thing we're working on here is just firing the wrist. That's all he's working on, just firing the wrist. Anybody can learn how to fire the wrist. And then the second part we'll work on is positioning of the elbow. And then the position of the offhand. And then the position of his feet. All those things broken down to the chunks. Notice what we didn't do is we didn't go out there and get 20 yards apart and talk about, all right, just let's see if you can throw it or not. And have him back there trying to chuck balls 20 yards. Because if we did that, his form would suffer. The only time we'll ever throw passes is once we've perfected the little chunks. We'll perfect each chunk, which builds on the other chunk, and then we'll put all four of those chunks together in throwing a pass. Now here's what we do when we put all those chunks together. It's going to look kind of like this. We've worked on firing the wrist. We've worked on the elbow position. We've worked on his footwork. Now, none of these things are perfect yet. Mind you, he's 7 years old, but he's worked on it, and he's done a pretty good job at getting those couple things down and understood. Here's another example of this. It's from a Dateline NBC news story following how experts practice.
As a coach, Linda Septia knows that making something look effortless actually takes breaking it down into a series of little parts. You have to do each part right and in the right order every time.
I can make anyone sing very well.
She's been doing this with Jaden Roberts, 8 years old, for the past 2 years. Linda won't let her get past a verse until she has it down. That's what throwing this ball back and forth is teaching her right now.
It has to be a habit, and it has to be repeated over and over and over. Then they've got to move to it. Then they've got to have a rhythm to it. Then they've got to put words to it.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
We're in rural New York State, the Meadowmount School. Nothing fancy to look at, but look at who studied here. Yo-Yo Ma, Joshua Bell, Itzhak Perlman, some of the greatest classical performers in the world today. Learning this way is not easy, breaking things down into small steps.
And, okay.
It's being interrupted.
It's much more intensified. You gotta, when you come in there,
It's having to try the same small section over and over.
Second component is speed. You want to slow it down. Here's a video of Ben Hogan. He's a world-class golfer. And this is in full speed. This video is in full speed. You can see the waves crashing in the background in full speed. What Ben here is doing is he is slowing down his swing so that mentally, as he's swinging, he can check all of his little checkpoints. He checks the club face. He checks his follow through. He checks his finish. He checks to make sure his right elbow is touching his hip. His left arm is straight. He's checking each of those things as he goes through. Now, if he was going through in full speed, he wouldn't be able to monitor those things. But since he has slowed down and broken it down into pieces, he can monitor each little piece by going very slow.
To give you an example of the role that speed plays, there's a good example from Dan Millman's book, The Inner Athlete, and he calls this the slow motion experience. And what you do is you put your hand out like this, everyone do this with me, and then you just flip it over. And when you do that, you are aware of two positions, the starting position and the end position. What you're not aware of is, was your thumb in or out when you were flipping? What muscles did you use? In order to monitor those things, you need to flip your hand in slow motion. And now you can monitor each individual movement. And if you want your thumb in, you can monitor that. If you want your wrist locked, you can monitor that. Everything is controlled when you go in slow motion.
Perfection is the goal. Don't ever lessen perfection. Reduce the speed and reduce the complexity to increase perfection. Your practice should look like that chart there on the right. Low complexity, low speed, a high level of perfection. And as you get better, once you can do it at a slow rate of speed perfectly, then increase your speed, then increase the complexity, and then add each chunk on top of each other. I believe that anybody could learn how to play one of Beethoven's symphonies. Now, it's very intimidating when you sit down and you see all, the entire song, and you hear it and you're thinking, I have to play this whole thing. But I believe that anybody could play the first three notes. If you can play the first three notes and perfect the first three notes, then you should be able to perfect the next three notes. And if you can perfect those three notes, then you can perfect the next three. So you just have to take it one little chunk at a time, perfect one little piece at a time, and when you put it all together, something amazing is created. Here is the Works Cited page, all those books that were on the first page. This PowerPoint came mostly from this book, Practice Made Perfect, and from this book, Slow Practice Will Get You There Faster. But I would encourage you to read all of those books. In the next video, we're going to talk about reinforcing it and why it's so important to reinforce perfect practice. If you go out and you practice poorly, high rate of speed, very complex, low rate of perfection, if you do that, it is detrimental to your success because you are practicing how to do something poorly.